London. It's been a while since I've been here. I used to work for Cable and Wireless, and I absolutely love coming back all the time when I get a chance. It's a great thing. So thank you for having me. So real quick, I want to actually kind of understand the audience. If you could help me out a little bit. Who here actually feels like your major discipline that you work on every day is security? Raise your hands. Okay, cool, cool. How about operations? A few more, all right. Development. Awesome. DevOps. All right. Cool, cool, cool. This helps a lot. Okay, fine. Management. Yay!
Took a few while to get the hands up.
All right, so if you like this presentation, please rank it. So who am I? I have been in this industry for well over 25 years. I started out as a kid, basically, in the industry. I was in banking, was my first job. I got a work permit in the States, and basically showed up and was a security analyst. And what I found out very quickly was computers worked in mysterious ways. And so I started out life kind of interesting, right? I've actually worked on many of the big breaches out there. Cable and Wireless was a company that had a few things out there, say data centers and telco equipment and all kinds of ways for hackers to take advantage of the equipment there. And I also have done things like development. I've gone out and worked with startups. I've worked with large organizations. And I currently run our DevSecOps team at Intuit. And it's around 12 people. They've gone through some really interesting experiments. I'm not good with carbon-based life forms. I will admit, I may be one, but I'm not very good with them. So people actually gave me folks to manage and said, go ahead, try it out. You've got this DevOps thing. We'll spend a year trying to figure out what we're going to do with it and how it works. And oh, by the way, at the same time you're doing that, can you go to the cloud with sensitive data? And so really that's what I do right now is I actually figure out how to make DevOps work for sensitive data in the cloud. All right, disclaimer. You may find out things during this talk that are very difficult to understand, that are going to be hard to hear. The truth sometimes is difficult to bear. But when it comes down to it, if you are a manager, you actually want to hear about the truth more often than not. If you're a developer, you probably are going to really like what I have to say because it's geared towards you. So I'm really excited to have this opportunity to talk to you. All right, so why is rugged important? And so, when I think about working on DevSecOps, one of the things that I learned a long time ago, and it was about 15 years ago, was that I was always the person who was on call. I actually grew up where there weren't a lot of women in the industry. And when it came down to it, I was the person who got the 3 a.m. call because it was kind of fun to get the girl out of bed at 3 a.m. to go take care of the large breach, because she wasn't going to know who to call. It was going to be really difficult and just fun to watch. So I was fun to watch. And so when it came down to it, I actually started learning some things very quickly. There was a huge need for a case for change. Waterfall was happening. I went through night after night of incidents and outages and trying to figure out what the difference was and going through people's code line by line, finding out that people didn't do very nice things in their code and really shouldn't have been allowed to actually push the buttons anymore. So obviously I kind of got a little grumpy, and so I started doing things like security testing their code. And before the 3 a.m. call, they would get a midnight call to say, oh, by the way, your code is busted. Could you please wake up and fix it? So there was a love-hate relationship that started brewing. And very quickly I said, well, I'm really tired of waking up to fix your breaches. Could you fix your code so that we don't have those? And what got invented right then and there was really this notion of rugged. Developers who wanted to come work with me more often than not because I would actually work to test their code, to find things that were security related, And so I became valuable very quickly. I thought that was kind of cool because I stopped getting the 3 a.m. phone calls. I started getting more participation. And then as I went from organization to organization, I sort of had the same mantra over and over. And so that was sort of the invitation to being rugged. Over time, I have developed code pretty much in darn near every language because at 3 a.m. you stop worrying about whether it's Java, C++, or whatever. You got to fix it. You got to get the customers back online. It doesn't matter that you're a security person because who cares? If it's a code outage, it's a code outage. And so all those lines, all those things that were barriers to try and make the customer experience better actually went away. So you can imagine that really, for me, this became a way of life. So my peers, however, started to invent these really long documents, 300 plus pages. I'm sure all of you have seen these. You probably have been handed a huge stack of paper, 300 plus pages. Please make your application secure. Come back to me in 4 months and I'll sign off. Anybody heard that before? Yeah. By the way, I have too. I have written tons of applications myself. I've gotten my teams to write them. And I got tired of getting handed the 300-page document to try and make my code secure so that it could operate properly. And so what I actually did is I started to do things like scripting the 300-page document and actually turning out an answer. Instead of having somebody review it, it actually approved itself. So I invalidated the need for the person who was going to sign the approval. And that was kind of my take on it. The other thing that was not helpful was having to go through the process that looks like this, where you show up with your code, you want to get it to production, your customer's unhappy, they really want their feature, and the CISO has this whole laundry list of things that have to happen before an approval takes place. And you can imagine that this is really frustrating, because I know it's really frustrating. It's even frustrating for me running in a very DevOps world now to see things like this happen. Which leads me to this. By the way, I actually have this sign in my office, and I constantly use it every day, and it really helps to get my message across. I hate making developers' lives miserable. In fact, one of the things that I've asked my team to do is to make it so that every developer who walks through the door wants to actually stay and hang out to do red teaming, so that they can learn how to make their code more resilient, more rugged, and more easily maintained over time. So my question to everyone in the room is, why wouldn't you ask your security team to operate like this? In fact, why wouldn't you demand it? This is such a critical part of the culture change for DevOps. You all actually get the opportunity to make this change happen. You get to request better security, better ways of operating, and really it starts out with developers requesting a better model. Our team created this model out of sheer necessity. We started out as DevOps. One of the things that I've long heard is that embedding is the way to go. And so I actually took that experiment personally, and I said, all right, let's try this embedded thing. I'm game. I'm willing to do it. We have 3,000 developers and 12 security-ish people. And so if you have 3,000 developers in DevOps, around 500 to 600 teams, 12 people, 500 to 600 teams, that's a lot of work for everybody every day. It means that we're causing things to go slow. It means that we're not providing the best value. It looks like approvals and exceptions and consultations and one of our favorite things to do, meetings. I actually started to really question that and the value it created for our teams. One of the things that came up in trying to put this to paper was, how do we take 12 people who all do different things and make them useful by putting them embedded into a DevOps team? So instead of the 500 to 600 projects, basically, we went down to 12 to 24. We realized very quickly we actually had to cover 36 to do anything of business value. So that meant that 3 projects per person had to be handled at any given time. And what we discovered through this model is that the context switching was really tough for a security person. They needed to write code, and they didn't know how. They knew these things that were paper documents, and they knew how to actually transcribe it for somebody, but that caused a lot of slowness, because when you come with a 300-page spec, obviously that's going to be really DevOps friendly, right? No. And so we got to the point where we realized, well, we're security people. We need to do things different, and we need to provide value. And so we discovered very quickly that we also had a hive mind in the 12 people, that sitting at the table and actually producing value was the most important thing we could do for our company, and creating self-service tools and actually thinking about automation and getting to the point where we could do compliance operations. So you got real-time feedback into the dev teams as a compliance enforcement officer. It was such a big change for our team, but we discovered embedded didn't work. We pulled back and said, all right, so how do we run a central function, which always is hated for DevOps. Everybody wants embedded, but I will tell you there is a way to operate so that you can have a very hybrid mode. Your security team can do things like code, produce self-service tools and APIs. And so there is a way to actually do this. So the problem statement was very, very clear. We had to run DevOps style security. Easy, right? Oh, by the way, we had to scale. That was a huge piece of the puzzle. Most of the security team doesn't actually deal with carbon-based life forms very well, like me, which is why they're managed by somebody who doesn't do that well, because that's the best way to get the most productivity out of people, is to give them all the same kind of culture, right? And so when I think about how we got here, what the 5 things were that were so important, they started to line up. And they lined up again back to being rugged. We started realizing, wow, wait, we came from being rugged. We're starting to go towards being rugged. Why not just be rugged? And oh, by the way, that didn't mean just the security team becomes rugged. It meant we were expecting people to come to us that were already pre-rugged. They were already becoming DevOps teams who could actually have a security discussion, who could quickly walk through the issues and figure things out in near real time. And the discussions turned to something like this. Veracode recently gave this discussion out at RSA, and it was really well received, actually. It is about the cloud. It's about software-defined environments. What's great about software-defined environments is that security now gets baked in as code, which means it puts the power back into the development community to start making these choices in real time with the code workloads that need to change. And basically, oh, wow, did I just hit the, sorry. Am I going forward or back? Thank you. I must have hit the. So Veracode gave this discussion during the RSA conference, and what was really amazing about it was this discussion about how to do this work and not make it part of the workload for the developer, but to actually start to produce information that could make it so developers could make choices. And one of the reasons I really liked it was I truly believe that developers need to take on some of the security context, need to make choices, need to actually learn and experiment with security so that things can get anti-fragile, so that you can get to the point where your workloads actually operate without attackers starting to take advantage of them. And so what was really great about this discussion was that there are now security people who are starting to figure out how to write code in the cloud, software-defined environments, move quickly, do DevOps, and start to understand what it means to have a conversation with somebody who's doing these things. But more importantly, what came out of this discussion was even more incredible, and it was something that we're actually participating in, which is we stopped having theoretical conversations. We're not trying to put everybody through threat modeling. We are starting to ask you to think about things like adding an attacks markdown file to your code base as part of your documentation, so that it becomes part of your living workload. And we're also adding things like red teaming. So we have something we call Red Team Monday. And instead of making somebody have to understand all of this magic and information, we red team the workloads that are in our environment every Monday. And that means that we pen test them, we hack them like we are external attackers. We do every type of black box testing, white box testing, anything we can get, we'll social engineer. And so what's really good about that is now you actually have the adversary that's internal to your organization that's helping you to get your workloads ready so that they can be in the outside world. In some cases, they already are in the outside world, and so trying to put your workload through a testing environment in a way that could achieve scale doesn't necessarily happen. So wouldn't it be a lot better if somebody could start to do recon like an attacker and be able to publish information about your workload so that you can make the changes in real time? That's what this is about. So the big question in our mind was, how do we return value to the organization as security people? Well, we figured out we really need to do DevOps too. We can't just say, okay, DevOps teams, you need to do security. We need to understand it ourselves. And so instead of trying to preach and tell all these stories, we started to realize that we were failing to communicate without understanding the problem by not just adopting it ourselves. So now the 12 people who work for me actually write code all day long. They check in multiple times per day. They have all of their stuff integrated into the cloud. We run solely all of our security workloads in AWS. And what's great about that is we get to see every bit of a software-defined environment, write security as code ourselves, understand the frailties, become experts in it, and provide that information back to anybody who will listen inside of our organization. And the other thing that I wanted to bring up on this slide too was we also kind of got to the point where we realized that our communication was a critical factor in trying to help people to be more rugged with how they thought about things. We started to do this notion of grading. So everybody's gone to school. We all get grades for how we've done in school. We take our tests, we get an A through an F. It's a pretty universal language, and instead of getting a Sev 5 vulnerability or a P0 or whatnot, we've actually started communicating with just letter grades. Your workload is failing. Your workload is getting an A. It's very easy to understand, and when you do it in real time, it becomes really powerful because somebody can just track their grades, they can see how their GPA is doing over time, and it's just a different way of thinking about things. But we realized that if we could translate it to something that simple as security people, we could actually help everybody who's trying to become better at writing code and returning value to the customer without trying to provide more overhead and getting them to understand security at the level of detail that we already do. So this is kind of the pitch area of my slide deck. I would tell you that one of the things that would be really helpful is to have every developer go back to their security organization and say, why not do DevSecOps? Why not do rugged? Why not do something that's going to start to change how you operate? Because it's such a critical piece of the puzzle. Really, AppSec should be part of the development process. You should have tools at your disposal like Gauntlet, like all of the scanners that a security person runs against your workload. Why aren't you getting the information to make changes? And so if you think about it, sometimes development reports come out and you actually get the information you need to make a change, like QA reports, right? But security reports are often held tight to the vest. God forbid you know where all the vulnerabilities are in the whole business. I mean, after all, why would we entrust that information to anyone? And that's kind of the thought process of a security person. But truly, that needs to change. It needs to get to the point where you need to demand that information to make your workload safer. And so it's actually upon everyone to start to figure out, how do we make security everyone's responsibility in the organization, and how do you play the part of a security person in the organization? The other things that have gotten added as a result of trying to make security part of DevOps has been, how do we actually turn security into code? So not every platform has all of the code that it needs to become more secure. So things like secure components, validation components, something that needs to be imported into your workload. And I use workload as sort of a full stack implementation. It includes your infrastructure as code. It includes your security as code. It includes your application and everything that actually supports a full stack implementation. And so all of these things that are being added are actually part of that process. Security engineering is really just new in the way that we're framing it, because we're actually asking our security engineers to start writing code. They have to put out things like CloudFormation templates or security group templates in CloudFormation. And that's been a big change. Compliance operations is sort of new as well. Instead of getting a 300-page document, you actually now get information to include in your workload. You may get tests to put into your testing agents. You may actually get, as part of compliance operations, tickets. Hate to say it, but that's sort of the evolution, is you got to go from paper to tickets before you can actually get to full code. And then if I think about the other thing that's actually been relatively new, it's security science. When you start to move your workload into a software-defined environment to support DevOps, instrumentation is absolutely critical. You have to have the ability to have more visibility in your workload so that you know when something's failing, which means, wouldn't it be great if the red team hacked you on a Monday, and by Monday night, you've already fixed what they found so that it can't get reported up to the board or whoever is at the executive level of your company. You really want sort of that feeling towards how you're actually implementing your code, and especially with DevOps. So if I think about the journey here, one of the things that I've been thinking about is, how do we programatize this process, right? DevOps and security really haven't been mashed together very well yet. There isn't a lot of information out there. This has been, again, sheer necessity. We've been experimenting with it. In fact, over the last couple of years, I've been going out to talk to people to learn more, because every time I give this talk, I learn more from everybody in the audience. I learn from your questions, and then we go out and we try those things, and we've constantly been creating the learning environment that even a developer has in DevOps. So as a security person, we are trainable. I hate to say it, but we really are. It takes a little bit to get through to us. We're a little bit hard to understand and figure out. But ultimately, I think when your heart's in the right place as a security professional and you're trying to figure out how to support DevOps, it can be done. It's just no one else has actually written it down. There's nothing out there, honestly. The closest we've gotten to it has been rugged, and trying to really understand how we bring more of this information to the community has been top of mind. So when we think about application security, what I would tell you is, I have our team actually turn our scanners around. So you get to go and run an API to run a scanner against your workload, your code, as part of your continuous integration and continuous deployment process. And that's great, because it means that the information is not just coming to us as a security team, it's actually going to you as a development team or your operations part of your team. And you're able to actually assimilate that information, make decisions about it, and render your workload less vulnerable. Or we actually have the cleanup process, which is every Monday, we actually set our sights on that same information, so we share it with you basically, and we use it to figure out what could an attacker do with this information if they had it. So as an example, when a scan runs on your web application and it's vulnerable to a struts attack, why not have a counterpart in the organization, like a security team, who can actually exploit that struts vulnerability before an attacker does? that helps to take the theory out of the conversation, and it really changes how everybody gets to communicate, and it gives you the environment with a security professional that allows you to make the choices that are necessary to help your business. I think one of the things that actually also came up for us was a total failure. Getting people to walk in and get an approval for understanding risk at a context level has always been a dismal failure for security people. In fact, I would tell you, all of my career has been about how do you have a security conversation and how do you change the landscape for it? How do you get the right information to the right people at the right time to make choices that are going to help and make a difference without impacting everything about that business at the same time? So red teaming has been new. I would say it's actually not for the faint of heart. This is really very different. So if you can imagine, every Monday, my team sits in a room, hacker style, with a bunch of Metasploit and, you know, the whole music thing, and it really looks like a bunch of hackers. They've even got, like, you know, their hoodies and everything because they got to play the part. We actually even have call signs now. So we kind of have fun, right? I mean, we've got a Hollywood hacker, and he got the name Hollywood because he's got like 4 panes and he takes over multiple boxes at the same time. It's kind of cool too because they have a little bit of fun with it. They actually use Captivate and do demo videos. So not only do you get information about how something got broken into, but you could actually watch the video and learn how it happened. So we kind of have a little bit of fun with this. And I think that one of the best things about Intuit that I love the most is the willingness to experiment and change and learn is really built into our culture. I would also say one of the other really interesting things is scoring has become part of the fabric of how we operate as a team. We have a scoring capability. It's all built on A through F. It's basically, you know, you set up tests, you try to actually figure out how something is vulnerable. Instead of trying to relate it to some security matrix, we relate it to something very simple and say, hey, so did the intern break in or was it Hollywood hacker? If it was the intern, that's probably a P0, and if it was Hollywood hacker, it's probably a P4. And so we kind of do some of that, and then we actually know, okay, well, this is an F, and that's like a C. And people know how to make choices based on that information alone. Instead of having to have us call you up, set up meetings, you're able to actually operate and make choices. So compliance operations, I think, has been one of the most revolutionary pieces of this puzzle. Really taking away the documents and trying to just simply get down to guardrails, guidelines, principles, information you can pull in. We run all of our security now out of GitHub. Everything's a markdown file. You can do a pull request against it. You can actually change how things are operating. And what's actually really great about that is now the security team knows how to do Git, and they understand where information goes, and they actually now are checking things in and trying to figure out, what does this look like if I have to scale it? So instead of just giving you paper documents, they go from paper documents into Git, and from there, how do I actually turn that into scripts and change how things are happening? And I think that that's really been a big change for our team, is that compliance now happens after you publish your code. You actually get information right away. You get tickets, you get a flood of tickets, and all of a sudden, oh wait, hold on, my workload doesn't work. It's not compliant, and therefore it probably may have issues. And I'm gonna find out on Red Team Monday, so I'd rather go fix some of these issues, but I have the ability to do that as a developer. Blue team. So you can't have a red team without a blue team. I learned that very quickly, and it was an ultimate failure for myself, was to just set up the red team. I realized very quickly that the red team goes out and does stuff like an attacker, but a blue team is really, really, really important. And the reason why is that they're the folks that actually write the rules to discover the patterns that the red team actually creates. so that the next time we see it, we can actually respond to it quicker. And so when I first set up the red team, I didn't really set up a blue team to begin with because I realized, no, I'd rather try and figure out if this red team thing is going to work. How many people am I going to piss off in our organization first? And then figure out whether the blue team is useful. And what I discovered from talking to the folks on the team is actually we needed to do both. And so we enlisted our team to do it and then realized we didn't have enough people to do blue team. So we enlisted more. And actually, at a certain point, we got to the point where we realized everybody was a blue team member. The organization now has the ability to come over and write searches and write rules and check those into the code repository for the monitoring platform. And so now your entire code base gets published into Git, and it becomes basically a living part of the environment. So data is critical. This is something that my team built. And we run all of our stuff in AWS, like I mentioned earlier. We have S3. We have a variety of big data workloads. We're running EMR right now. We actually killed our Splunk implementation because it got too big. We have 1,400 accounts. We use accounts as containers in AWS. We spend a lot of time instrumenting the accounts, so we take in as much data as we possibly can from the instance, from the application, from AWS. If we can force AWS to give us more data, we will. And so we just take in a ton of information, and then when we red team, we instantly have information to write rules against. So we leverage every bit of the same environment we're trying to protect to try and understand more about it. And so this actually builds up skills for your security team. If your security team is not actually developing code, they're not running in AWS, they're not running in some other cloud environment, they're not running VMs or Docker containers, they don't have the context. And that's something we learned, and we learned the hard way. We learned as security people walking into a room, theorizing and being told no, and that we were a terrible team to work with, and banging our heads against the wall going, how do I actually fix this? And then realizing, okay, why don't we just try and go code? And coding for security people is really ugly. Don't do it. Don't do it right away. In fact, I would tell you, some of the devs in this room probably have a better opportunity to learn how to be full stack engineers faster than security people. We ran that experiment and discovered that a developer has the ability to be 5 times faster at becoming a full stack engineer than an actual security person, which is really cool. It means the security person has to learn how to code, and that takes a lot longer than teaching a developer how to understand how to make security happen and change how security gets remediated. And the other thing we actually learned from this platform was also pretty unique. We learned that our workloads are actually vulnerable every 10 days. We gave that information to our community. We learned that the best password was 11 characters, except for on Red Team Monday, when the red team didn't care about cracking the password, they just stole it. So that was sort of a, well, we did all this interesting information and calculated exactly what we needed, and the red team went in and found some hole that caused it so that we could actually just get the password anyways. And so, you know, you learn from those things. You learn from the failures and you learn from the successes just alike. So, you know, I think what I love about our journey has been just simply understanding what it is we're trying to achieve and experiment with it. So you heard about hypothesis-driven development earlier from Adrian, and that just spoke to me because we actually do something called incident-driven development, which is exactly the same thing. Hypothesis has to get created, and an experiment needs to get run, and a security person needs to be trained to do those things. So here's some emerging statistics and things to know about DevSecOps and rugged and really coming together with these concepts. When I started doing this, there were only, I think I was the first one who actually put DevSecOps on my LinkedIn profile because I was just crazy enough to do it. And so far there's 36 people, and we're trying to build up more momentum in the industry. We're actually going out and actively talking to folks about this. What's also great is we've seen other things emerge. So SecDevOps started to have some traction. We're starting to see DevOps have some traction. I'm not sure that I care what you call it at this point. What I would tell you is that security has to become part of what you do every day so that we can get ahead of attackers. And my mission in life is to make it so infeasible for attackers to do anything with the workloads that are out there that it becomes a non-business. And I think that that's actually what's going to change how we move forward with more technology so that our children can actually take advantage of it in the future. So thank you, everybody, so much. I really appreciate your time.